Okay, so yesterday we had talked about changing the A, which affects our amplitude, changing the B, which affects our period, and changing the C, which with the C and B combined affect um, our phase shift, horizontal shift, or I call it the starting point. All right. So we're just going to do another one, kind of where we left off yesterday, just to kind of get us back into the groove. All right. So in this case, our A, which is the number in front of sine here, and since there isn't one, it is 1. All right, our b, which is the number in front of our x here, which is pi, and our c, which is the opposite of whatever number is over here. All right, so in this case, it is negative pi. All right, so now we want to go through and find, our information about this graph. So first we can start with the amplitude. And that's the absolute value of A, so that's just 1. And that tells us how far up and how far down we go from the middle of our graph, all right, which I call the baseline. All right, our period, which is 2 pi divided by b. So in this case, 2 pi divided by pi, which is just 2. Our intervals, which is essentially our x scale, we always take whatever our period is and divide it by 4. So in this case, that will just be 1/2. All right, our start, which is c divided by b. So negative pi over pi is just 1. All right, and then our end, we always do our start, which is 1, plus or minus the period, which is 2. All right, so that'll go negative 1 to the left and 3 to the right. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry, that should be negative 1. It's definitely not the absolute value, which will affect this. Switch it around. So this will be negative 3 and positive 1. All right, so now we want our axes on here. Remember, you don't always necessarily want to put your y-axis on right away. In this case, it's not going to hurt, but remember we like to put the start right in the middle. All right, and then we want to go 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. All right. So now our intervals are 1/2. So as I go to the right, I'm going to add 1/2, right? So this would be negative 1/2. This would be 0. All right, this would be positive 1/2. This would be 1. Here, negative 1.5, negative 2, negative 2.5, negative 3. Of course, if we do this correctly, it should match with our ends over here, which obviously it does. All right, this is 0, so we do know that that is going to be where our y-axis will be. All right, and our amplitude is just 1, so we only really need to go up and down 1. Our start is actually, before we do that, we do like to put on our guidelines. All right, so our baseline for the time being is still the x-axis. My amplitude of 1 tells me that I need to go up 1 for my maximum and down 1 for my minimum. All right, so I'm starting at negative 1. Sine always starts on the baseline. My A is positive, which means as I go to the right, I go up first, then back down to the baseline, down to the minimum, back to the baseline. Follow that pattern going the other direction. And connect this with as smooth a curve as we can. And we're done. Questions or concerns? All right, why don't you try this one? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look here. All right, so our A, again, the number in front of sine here is 1. Our B, the numbers in this case in front of our variable, so this is 2 pi. And our C, the opposite of whatever is being added or subtracted to our argument here. So negative 4 pi. So we go ahead and find all of our information here. Our amplitude, absolute value of A, which is 1. Our period, which is 2 pi over B. So 2 pi over 2 pi, which is 1. Our intervals Well, we just take our period and divide it by 4. So in this case, 1/4. Our start is C over B. So negative 4 pi over 2 pi, which is negative 2 pi. I'm sorry, negative 2. The pi's will cancel. Right, and our end, we take our start plus or minus the period. All right, so we will get negative 3 and negative 1. So we go ahead and put our axes on here. All right, we put our start in the middle. So negative 2. All right, we're going by fourths. So this will be negative 1.5 and negative 1, negative 2.5 and negative 3. All right, so the y-axis isn't even anywhere within our 2 periods, really. So you can just go ahead and put it off to the side. And again, our amplitude is just 1, so we're just going to be going up 1 and down 1. So we can put our guidelines on here again. As of now, our baseline is the x-axis. Our amplitude of 1 tells us we need to go up 1 for the maximum and down 1 for the minimum. All right, our start is at negative 2. Sine always starts on the baseline. My A is positive, which means as I go to the right, I go up first. And then just creep up and down our ladder here. Follow the pattern going in the opposite direction. And connect this with a nice smooth curve. It's terrible, but it happens. All right. Any questions or concerns there? Okay, we're going to do the last piece here. All right. So we've seen A, B, C, and D. Right now, this is y equals D. We've seen A, B, and C. So now here's D. A lot of textbooks and software programs and everything, you see it like this, which I think is completely and utterly ridiculous. All right. I often write it like this, like when I write tests. It just makes sense to go in alphabetical order. And with every other function that we've seen, the vertical translation has been a plus or minus kind of outside at the end, right? So I don't know why with sine and cosine they decided to sometimes throw it out front, right? But just be mindful, all right, that you can see it either way, right? The number that's off by itself is always the D, right? The number in front of the sign is always the A. The number in front of the variable is always the B. And then, like obviously there's nothing here, but so this would be equivalent to that. All right, it is also important to keep in mind, right, that because A and B are multiplying things, all right, that if A or B is not present, it is just a 1, because that's the multiplicative identity of things, right? You multiply something by 1, it doesn't change it. All right, C and D are adding and subtracting, which means if one of those is not present, it is a zero, right? Because zero is the additive identity, which means if you add or subtract zero, it doesn't change that thing. Okay, so do be mindful. A missing A or B is a 1. A missing C or D is a 0. Okay, so now we can go ahead and go through all of our pieces of information like normal. All right, so our A is going to be 3. Our B is going to be 2. There is no C, so it will be 0. And our D is going to be 2. All right. Now, where D comes into play here, right? That is our vertical translation. All right. D is the baseline or the midline, that middle line, right? Which will always be the exact middle of my graph. All right. So my amplitude is going to be the absolute value of A, which is 3. The period is going to be 2 pi divided by B, which is 2. So that will just be pi. Our intervals, we always just take our period and divide it by 4. So in this case, pi over 4. Our baseline, which is going to be the middle of the graph, is my D, which in this case is 2. The start is C divided by B. 0 over 2 is just 0. And the end is the start plus or minus the period. So in this case, it will be negative pi to the left and pi to the right. Okay, so put our x-axes on here. All right, so we put our start in the middle, which is actually 0, so we can just go ahead and make that the y-axis. And then I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. All right, now my start, my midline is at 2, and I have to go up 3, so up to 5, and down 3, so down to negative 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bless you. All right, so our baseline is at 2. That's going to be the middle of my graph. My amplitude is 3, which means I need to go up 3 to 5. And I need to go down 3 to negative 1. All right, I probably should have labeled my axis here. All right, so my intervals are pi over 4. So 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, or just pi. And you can simplify these if you want, right? You could easily have said that was negative pi over 2, right? But you don't have to. It's not a big deal. All right, so I'm starting at 0. This is sine, so I'm starting on my baseline. All right, my A is positive, so I go up first as I go to the right, up to my maximum, then back to my baseline, down to my minimum, back to the baseline. Follow that pattern going the other direction. Connect this with a nice smooth curve. Obviously, I'm terrible on this pad, but you get the point. Okay, so that's the first one where the middle of our graph has been somewhere new, right? And all that is this number that's being kind of added off to the side. All right, go ahead and try this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at all of this again. All right, so our A is 2, the number in front of sine. Our B is 1/3, the number in front of our variable. All right, our C is 0 because there's nothing being added or subtracted in our argument. And our D is -4. All right, so the amplitude is 2. The period is 2 pi divided by b. So 2 pi divided by 1/3. Dividing by 1/3 is the same as multiplying by 3. So that is 6 pi. Right? The intervals, that is 6 pi, 6 pi divided by 4. All right, now, of course, that can be reduced, but you may want to hold off on that because remember, we like to have our um, start and end and intervals and all of that kind of with a common denominator. So you can hold off on that for a time being. All right, our baseline, which is just the D, is -4. Our start is C over B. Of course, 0 divided by anything is 0. All right, and our end is our start plus or minus the period. All right, so that's going to be negative 6 pi and 6 pi. All right, so now we can start with an axis. All right, and we are starting on 0, so we can go ahead and put our y-axis right here. It's perfectly fine. All right, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. All right, now my baseline is negative 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the amplitude is 2, so I'm going to have to go down 2 further to 6 as well. All right, so this is 0. This would be 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2. All right, so this would be 3 pi. This would be 6 pi. This would be negative 3 pi and negative 6 pi. All right, we said that our baseline was at negative 4. So over here somewhere. My amplitude is 2, so from there I need to go up 2 and down 2. All right, we were dealing with sine again, so I'm starting at 0 and I'm going to start on the baseline. So right here, my A was positive, I believe. So I'm going to be going up first as I go to the right, and then down to my minimum. Follow that pattern. That's perfectly fine. Yep. Yeah, terrible, but you get the point. Okay. So now we'll just do some simple stuff here for a minute, and then we'll jump back to when we see A, B, C's, and D's. All right, so here we just want to find the amplitude and the period. That's it. All right, so here, my amplitude is the absolute value of A, so what would that be? 4, yeah. And my period is 2 pi divided by B, so what would that be? Yep, that's it. So for the second one, what's the amplitude? 2/5, yep. And what's the period? 2, yeah. 2 pi divided by pi. All right, so just 2. Pretty straightforward. Go ahead and just do these to yourself real quick. Should only take a moment. All right, so of course my amplitude here is 7. All right, do be mindful that it's not -7, right? It's always the absolute value of A. All right, and the period, my B is just 1, so that's just 2 pi. All right, here, amplitude, 1/3. All right, the period is 2 pi divided by 2/3. All right, well, that's the same thing as 2 pi times 3/2. So essentially those will cancel, and this will become 3 pi. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how functions relate to essentially the parent function. All right, so what's going on here? Right, obviously my amplitude isn't changing, my period isn't changing, my baseline isn't changing. What's the only thing that's changing? What's that? Yeah, what does that affect? The start. Yeah, it affects the start. So it's going to be a horizontal or a phase shift. Is this going to be shifting to the left or to the right? To the left, right? So this will be just to the left pi. And that's it. That's the only transformation going on. All right. All right, so this is sine of 5x. All right, so this is b here. All right, my b here is -5. All right, so the negative isn't really going to affect the period, right? Because as far as distance from 0 is concerned, right, 5 and -5 are the same as far as the period. But what's this negative going to do? Flip it about what? The y. Yeah. What's that? The baseline doesn't change at all because there's nothing being added or subtracted out here. No, there's no vertical shift here, right? There would have to be like a -5 out here. Remember, inside here, this is just a multiplier, right? So this is my b would be -5. My d would still be 0, and the only thing that has to do with baseline is d. So all this would do is a reflection about the y-axis. Now with an odd function, right, whether you reflected about the x or reflected about the y, it's actually going to look the same. So I don't want you to be too concerned there. Right, now what's going on here? Right, the 2x and the 2x are the same, so that's not going to really do anything. What's this -5 here do? Nope, doesn't flip it because it's not multiplying. Yeah, it moves it down 5. Yep, this is the baseline. Right, my baseline would be -5. So this just shifts it down 5. Yeah, I don't like D in the front either. It annoys me. And why call it D then, right? Like they clearly did these things alphabetically, just A, B, C, D, right? I don't start the alphabet with D. I'm just saying. All right, what is going on here? What what does this change? What's that? Oh, well, this negative will flip something. Absolutely. The negative will flip it up, reflect it about the x-axis. What's this 2/3 do? Yeah, I mean, it's going to affect my amplitude as far as what we think of, but what is the amplitude affecting my amplitude? What kind of um, transformation is that? A vertical stretch or shrink. Yeah. In this case, it's going to be a shrink because it's less than 1. All right, so here is, we already wrote this down, right? This is just the standard form. I personally much prefer this. All right, so sketch the graphs of each function and include 2 periods. All right, so here we have most everything. All right, so my A, the number in front of sine, is going to be 3. My B, the number in front of my variable, is 1. C, the opposite of whatever is here, so that's positive pi. And D is going to be 5. So now we can find all of our information here. The amplitude is going to be 3. And the period is going to be 2 pi over b, which is just 2 pi. The intervals, we divide this by 4, so that would be pi over 2. Again, you don't have to reduce it if you don't want here. All right, the baseline, the middle of my graph, is just d, which is 5. The start is c over b, so that's just pi. The end, which is my start, plus or minus the period, so that will be negative pi and 3 pi. All right, so I will put my x-axis down here. Right, my start goes in the middle, so this is pi. And then I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. And my intervals are pi over 2, so this would be, which is a half of a pi. So this would be 2 pi, this would be 3 pi, this would be 0, and this would be negative pi. Of course, 0, we can just say, oh, okay, well, that has to be my y-axis. My baseline is at 5, and my amplitude is 3. So I'm going to have to go start at 5 and go up 3 and down 3. So from 2 to 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, we said the baseline was at 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is over here. So amplitude says to go up 3 from my maximum and down 3 to my minimum. This is sine. So I'm going to start on my baseline, and it says to start at pi. Right, my A is positive, so I'm going to go up first as I go to the right. pattern going the other direction. Connect this with a curve. And we're done. All right, try this one. I feel this one might get a little messy, so do be careful with your intervals and start. Lesson. All right, so our A is 4. Our B is 1/2. Our C is pi over 3. And our D is -3. All right, so our amplitude is the absolute value of A, which is 4. Our period, which is 2 pi over B. So 2 pi divided by 1/2. Dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So that's 4 pi. Our intervals, take our period and divide it by 4. That's easy, just pi. Our baseline is D, which is -3. Our start, which is C over B, so pi over 3 divided by 1/2. Again, dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So this is 2 pi over 3. And our end is our start, which is 2 pi over 3, plus or minus our period, which is 4 pi. We need that to have a common denominator, right? So this is going to be 12 pi over 3. All right, so this will be negative 10 pi over 3 to the left, and 14 pi over 3 to the right. All right, which means we want our intervals to have this common denominator too. All right, so this will obviously just be 3 pi over 3. All right, so we can put our axes on here. Our baseline is going to be 3, or negative 3 rather. So, and our amplitude's 4. So we know we're going to have to go all the way down to negative 7. That's how I know to put my x-axis up high. Whoops, and I definitely did not want my y-axis on. Okay, so we're going to start here at 2 pi over 3. And then I will go 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, our intervals are pi, so 3 pi over 3. So this will be 5 pi over 3, 8 pi over 3, 11 pi over 3, and 14 pi over 3. Again, I can check if I did that correctly by checking it against this end. Going to the left, I'm going to be subtracting pi, or 3 pi over 3. So this would be negative pi over 3, negative 4 pi over 3, negative 7 pi over 3, and negative 10 pi over 3. Again, you can check that against this end right here. All right, do be mindful that none of these were 0, which means I am not going to have a point on my y-axis. All right, now where is my y-axis going to be? Yep, it's always going to be between the negative and the positive. Which one of these is it going to be closer to? Negative pi over 3. All right, so there's our axes there. All right, so baseline of negative 3 and down 4, so I know I have to get to 7. So negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so my baseline is on negative 3, which is over here. All right, amplitude tells me to go up 4, which would take me to 1. And down 4, which would take me to negative 7. All right. So this is sine. So my start is at 2 pi over 3, and sine starts on the baseline. So here, as I go to the right, my A is positive. So I go up first, back to the baseline, down to the minimum, back to the baseline. Follow that pattern going the other direction. Remember, we are not putting a point on the y-axis here. connect that with a nice smooth curve. And we're done. All right, those ones are about as hard of ones as you'll see. All right, whenever you have ones where like the start and the intervals don't line up nicely, all right, um, those are the most difficult ones. All right, we will try one more. I would love to know what that noise is. Good question, because somehow it's not left in here. Well, let's do cosine. Yeah. Just as a question, how many of you guys are going to the the what's that? Yes. How many of you are going? Okay. And, yeah, how many of you are in it or going? Right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Friday. Okay. Thank you. Just kind of wanted to get a sense of how many people would be out. Well, now that we're all back, Friday isn't going to be like the designated quiz or test day. It's just going to be whenever we finish, right? Like if we take a test on a Tuesday, we take a test on a Tuesday, right? It doesn't really matter. Um, I just did that. The reason why I always did that while we were hybrid is so that um, I wouldn't have to take 2 days to test, right? Like if we finished on like a Monday and I wanted to test people right away, then I would have had to test like 8A people on Tuesday, test B-Day people on Wednesday, and then I just never wanted to take 2 days to test, right? So that's kind of why I always made Friday the quiz and test day, which doesn't necessarily have to be the case anymore. So. I don't believe you. You're lying, terribly lying. You're still a bad student, though. Not because you've been on your phone, just because you're a bad student. Okay. As long as we're clear on that part, then we're fine. All right, so for time purposes, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we've got A is negative 1/2. B is 1/3, right? X over 3 is the same thing as 1/3 x. Right? C is negative pi over 4. Remember, it's always the opposite here, so if there's a plus, it has to be a negative. All right, and D is 4. What's that? Oh, we're good? Okay. All right, so we go through, even though this is cosine, it doesn't matter. We go through all of the same process. All right, so our amplitude is going to be 1/2. Remember, it is the absolute value of A. All right, our period is 2 pi over B. So 2 pi over 1/3. Dividing by 1/3 is the same as multiplying by 3. So 6 pi. All right, intervals is going to be 6 pi. Whoops. Why did you do that? 6 pi over 4. Again, you can reduce that if you want, but you may want to wait because we may need to get common denominators later anyway. All right, our baseline is 4. Our start is C over B. So negative pi over 4 divided by 1/3. Again, that's the same as multiplying by 3. So this is going to be negative 3 pi over 4. All right, and our end is our start plus or minus our period, which we're going to want to get a common denominator here. So this will be 24 pi over 4. All right, so this will be as we go to the left, we would get negative 27 pi over 4. And to the right, we would get 21 pi over 4. And now these all have 4s as denominators, so we're good here. All right, so we can put our axes on here. All right, now my baseline is 4. My amplitude's 1/2, so I'm going to have to go up to 4.5 and down to 3.5. So somewhere lower for our x-axis is good. And our start goes in the middle here. So this is negative 3 pi over 4. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right. And 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left. All right, our intervals are 6 pi over 4. So this would be 3 pi over 4, 9 pi over 4, 15 pi over 4, and 21 pi over 4, which we can check with this. It matches, so we're good. And now we have negative 9 pi over 4, negative 15 pi over 4, negative 21 pi over 4, and negative 27 pi over 4, which again we can check here. It matches, we're good. Right, so now we need to determine where we put our y-axis. Again, note that none of these are 0. All right, therefore we're not going to have a point on our y-axis. It's going to be here between negative 3 pi over 4 and positive 3 pi over 4. And it's actually going to be exactly in the middle of those two. All right, so now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, our baseline is at 4. And our amplitude's only a half. All right, so we're only going a half there and a half there. So it's going to be very condensed. All right, so now this is cosine. So I start at the maximum or minimum, depending on my A. My A is negative, so I actually start at the minimum. All right, so I'm starting at negative 3 pi over 4, and I'm starting at the minimum. Of course, from the minimum, there's only one place to go, up. Remember, we're not counting the y-axis here, so I go to the baseline here, maximum here, back to my baseline, down to my minimum, following the same pattern going the other direction, baseline, maximum, baseline, minimum. So then, of course, I connect that with a nice low. And we are done. Mr. Crouch. I do. Sure, sure. Uh-huh. Okay. You leaving?
Question.
Yes.
So on the homework, like whenever it's cosine, we start at the minimum.
You start at the minimum or maximum, depending on your A. If your A is positive, you start at the maximum. If your A is negative, you start at the minimum. And
so we do everything the same. It's just where we start is different.
exactly. All right. And
All right,
now with sine, you always start at the baseline. But if your A is positive, you go up first. If your A is negative,
Right.
you go down first.
Right.
Okay. So that's the only difference between sine and cosine.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or concerns? Okay. Then we'll call it a day there, and you can go ahead and keep working on that graphing worksheet from yesterday. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.